interestingly enough, as many times as Joe Biden said that he was not going to try to reform the Supreme Court, now all of a sudden he has decided to change his mind. It's interesting. I don't know if he's just trying to do this to help out Kamala come November, but he is trying to change his mind on this. I'm going to get into this clip and then I'm going to explain to you why this is mute at this point. And this is Johnny come lately. This will not work. He should have done this a long time ago. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here from News Nation.
Breaking news for you this morning, straight from the White House. No one is above the law. That's President Biden's message as he proposes massive new changes to the Supreme Court. The president releasing a major new reforms plan for the Supreme Court with details in an op-ed published in the Washington Post just about 30 minutes ago. The president says he will work with Congress to pass the major reforms, including imposing term limits for justices. Democratic lawmakers this morning now pushing to get the Supreme Court on the ballot in November. News Nation's Tom Dempsey is in Washington, D.C. for us this morning with the breaking details on this sweeping new plan. Tom, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Brooke. Yeah, just about 30 minutes ago, President Joe Biden's team made public this announcement calling for significant reform with the Supreme Court, including pushing for term limits for the justices, where every 2 years, a president would appoint a justice to serve an 18-year term on the high court. The president's team saying that this proposed change would ensure that no president, any single president, can have undue influence on the court. Other proposed changes include the No One is Above the Law amendment to the Constitution, which would
pause. So the reason why I believe this is being pushed forward is because of the ruling that came from the Supreme Court that basically protects Donald Trump and any other president that comes after him for basically being above the law, which I would consider presidents above the law anyway, even when they're not president. I mean, have we seen a president like, really? So let's think about that, for example. But president calls for reform, amendment to limit presidential immunity. That's in reference to the ruling from the Supreme Court towards Donald Trump. Term limits for SCOTUS justices. I'm assuming that has to do with the conservative court that we have now. Too many conservative justices on the court. And binding code of conduct for SCOTUS. Now, I want to go ahead and say this here. I heavily approve of term limits. I've been calling for that for a long time. I agree with that, not just for SCOTUS, but I believe that Congress should also have term limits as well, right? So the president of the United States has term limits, right? They can only serve 2 consecutive terms, right? Okay, so everybody else should have term limits too. I don't approve of a lifetime appointment, and I've had frustration about this for quite some time. I don't know about you, but I've never had a job where I was given a lifetime appointment. In my state, it's always been an at-will employer state. Every place that I've worked for, they explained to you during orientation that they can fire you with or without just cause. So why did the Supreme Court get this type of special treatment? No, it should never be a lifetime appointment. So I do agree with that. Now, let's go a little bit forward here, and I'm going to tell you why this is not going to work, though, unfortunately.
Limit immunity for former presidents and leave open the chance they could be prosecuted in federal court for crimes committed while in office. This comes after the Supreme Court earlier this month ruled that presidents have some immunity for official acts while in office in response to a challenge from former President Trump's legal team in the federal election interference case against him. President Biden's team also calling for a binding and enforceable code of conduct with the Supreme Court, requiring justices to disclose gifts, refrain from public political activity, and recuse themselves from cases if they or a spouse have a financial or conflict of interest with the case.
Okay, so the financial conflict of interest, that is referring to the articles of impeachment that AOC presented against Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. Right. So they had some financial dealings there that were not up to code. And I've said this before, when they passed the legislation that basically said that officials can now take bribes, which they are referring to it as a gift. They were protecting themselves. So I was right about that. So here we go. Here we are.
In a statement, President Joe Biden saying, quote, "This nation was founded on a simple yet profound principle. No one is above the law. Not the president of the United States, not a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States. No one." And he goes on to say, quote, "What is happening now is not normal, and it undermines the public's confidence in the court's decisions, including those impacting personal freedoms. We now stand in a breach." The president's team saying they will work with Congress to pass these big changes for the Supreme Court. And we expect President Biden to talk more about these proposed changes during a stop in Texas later today to mark the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Brooke?
Yeah, some strong words from the president in this op-ed, again, released just moments ago, even calling one of the reforms he's proposing common sense. I think, Tom, a lot of people, as they're going to hear this breaking news this morning, are going to think about the timing of this announcement, right? It's pretty interesting, coming just over 3 months from the election and from a president who's already said he's not running for re-election.
Right. He's not running for re-election, but still, I think Joe Biden is a little bit salty. We talked about the story yesterday of the Seymour Hersh article that revealed that Obama basically, put this coup together against Joe Biden. And they basically all got together with him and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries. They all got together and decided we're going to push this mofo out. Right. So Biden didn't like that. And Biden decided to clap back. So once that happened, Joe Biden said, you know what? I'll go ahead and decide not to run for re-election then. But then I'm going to also nominate and endorse Kamala Harris. And that was a jab at Obama because Barack Obama told him he would not openly, readily endorse Kamala Harris for president because he did not believe that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump. So Joe Biden did that as a little bit of a jab towards Obama. So this could be a way of Joe Biden trying to say, I'm going to do as much stuff as I can so I don't go down as Genocide Joe. You still will be remembered for genocide, Joe. You'll be remembered for that and the crime bills and the racist comments that you made and the Anita Hill appearance and the courtroom scene where you decided to say you wanted to cut Medicare and Social Security and you said you wanted all those people off the street and you didn't care what neighborhood they came from. You'll be remembered for those things, Joe.
Yeah, not a coincidence that this announcement is being announced less than 100 days before Election Day. And also keep in mind that some Democrats have been really pushing for changes on the Supreme Court, especially after that immunity ruling earlier this month with former President Donald Trump. Also very important to note, Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito have been at the center of some controversy on the court after last year when ProPublica reported describing Justice Thomas receiving undisclosed luxury vacations paid for by Republican megadonor Harlan Crow for 2 decades. Conservative activist Leonard Leo faces accusations of organizing a trip to a luxury fishing lodge in Alaska for Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito back in 2008, which he did not disclose. Alito also faced controversy earlier this year when a New York Times report described an upside-down American flag flying at his home soon after January 6, as well as an Appeal to Heaven flag last summer, which some participants on January 6 carried. So all these things likely playing a role into this announcement earlier this morning from the Biden team. Brooke.
The Biden administration and the president, for his part, not naming the justices or former President Donald Trump, but certainly alluding to all of them. All right, Tom Dempsey in D.C., thank you. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, so a lot of corruption that has been happening there. I'm glad it's getting more attention. But here's the problem you're going to run into, folks. Now, Kamala Harris has tweeted this as well. There is a crisis of confidence facing the Supreme Court. That is why President Biden and I are calling on Congress to pass critical reforms that will help restore confidence in the courts and strengthen our democracy. And here it is here. Calling for reforms, again, term limits, binding ethic rules for the Supreme Court, and no immunity for crimes of a former president committed in office. Now, let me just go ahead and say this. Here's the problem. Calling on Congress to pass critical reforms. Honey, the time to do this would have been when the Democrats had the House. The Republicans have the House. The Democrats don't have the House. This is what I mean when I say that Democrats are reactive instead of proactive. They don't prepare for gloom and doom. They let the gloom and the doom happen and then they react. That's what they do. And that's how we get here. So obviously, the Republican House is not going to pass this. So it's not even going to make it to the Senate because they know this is a jab at the conservative justices and the Supreme Court. So they're not going to pass this. Where was this when you had control of the House? And this is not the first time they did this, fam. They've done this as long as I can remember. They did it under Obama. Don't you remember Barack Obama? He said that he would codify Roe v. Wade. That was his number one thing that he said that he would get done. First day in office, Obama wins and says, we are not going to do that. And he blamed it on Lieberman. We couldn't do it because of Lieberman. But even Ro Khanna told me himself on this show that Obama still could have, ended the filibuster. Still could have done that. This is the game. They don't do everything that they can do while they have the majority, while they can do it. They wait and give you a little bit of crumbs, and then they hang that over your head. And that's how they get you to vote for them again. If you vote for us this time, we'll make it happen. So here's the rhetoric that's going to come down the pipeline, folks. Write this down. President Biden and I wanted Congress to pass this so we could try to reform the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the Republicans voted against it. So we didn't get it accomplished. So in order for us to get this accomplished, you will have to vote for the Democrats. You're going to have to come out heavily in November and vote for Democrat candidates for the House and for the Senate so that we can gain control of the House again and get a majority in the Senate. And then we can get this passed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the same script over and over, fam. Now, what's the difference between the two? One thing I will say about the Republican Party, they tend to be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive. The first year that Donald Trump was president, and no, I don't support Donald Trump. Again, I always have to say that because people will tune in and be like, oh, you for Trump then, you for Trump. But the first year that Donald Trump was president, he got a lot of things done. When they have the majority, they get things done that they want to get done. I may not agree with what they're trying to fucking pass, but they get it done. The Democratic Party, they have the majority and they just sit on it. Just sit. Barack Obama did this too. He did this. People are like, well, you guys forget that Barack Obama did not have a majority and da-da-da-da. Barack Obama, the first 2 years, could have gotten things done. When we're talking about Obamacare, to pass the type of healthcare legislation that he really wanted to pass, because he watered it down to please the Republicans, he could have gotten that done his first 2 years. This is intentional. They wait till Republicans, and we can't do it because they have the majority. So this is not going to be done because Democrats don't have the House majority. So this is theater, folks. Don't fall for this. And again, I agree with term limits. It needs to happen. And it needs to happen across the board, not just with the Supreme Court. It needs to happen with Congress too, boo. Because I'm getting really tired of some of these politicians staying in office until they're like 98, 99 years old and they can barely talk and you're just wheeling them in. That was Dianne Feinstein. That was ridiculous.